All right, well, thank you, Alyssa. Good morning from Vienna, Virginia, and welcome to the ECI Ethics Ambassador Academy, creating and sustaining an innovative ethics ambassador program. As Alyssa said, my name is Dan Waltman. I'm Vice President of Member Engagement at ECI. And we're delighted today to have hundreds of attendees participating from around the world for what we hope will be an ongoing conversation with the E&C community about the importance of ethics ambassadors programs. And no doubt about it, ambassador programs are important. We see companies making significant investment in these programs, with nearly 55% of ECI members telling us they have a formal program in place, averaging between 60 and 150 ambassadors based upon the size of the company. But they also tell us they're seeking additional resources to help implement and manage their programs, and just as important, provide opportunities to develop those who serve in the role of ethics ambassador. We designed today's program to be useful whether you run an established program or are just thinking about implementing one. We have a dynamic lineup of speakers representing a range of industries, as well as a variety of programs. And the goals of ethics ambassador programs can vary widely, whether it's just to communicate to employees about the activities of an E&C program, advising employees whether they have questions or concerns about a code of conduct, planning local programming, or receiving reports of suspected misconduct. There will definitely be useful and insightful information, no matter what the goals are of your program. And finally, I would like to extend a huge thank you to our sponsors, the Broadcat and ComplianceLine, for their generous support of today's program. So without any further ado, let's get started and kick it off to our first session. What is an ethics ambassador program? Moderated by Nick Gallo. Nick, over to you.
If I could see your, do you know how to put it in like you can see all slides?
We're giving out.
Oops.
Down at the bottom when you go into presentation.
Nick, I'm sorry, could you unmute yourself?
Do you have?
I was saying that we were giving out demerits if people's mics are on. So I think I need to get my first demerit because my mic was off. So how's everyone doing today? Super excited to dive in. Thanks for ECI for putting on this great event. You know, what's great about sponsoring an ECI event is that you actually, they rope you in to do some work for them. So I get to host a couple of these episodes today. I'm really excited about this particular topic because I think it's top of mind for everybody and it's something that we all can take action on in every single one of our organizations. We're entering this new phase of ethics and compliance, and it's one about where crowdsourcing risk management is really the name of the game. And many of us in the ethics and compliance department feel like we're pushing a string up a hill or we're a goalie in a soccer match with no defenders. And by actualizing ethics ambassadors in our organization, we can really start to move the needle and really start to invigorate the ethical cultures that we all dream of. So I am thrilled to have a great panel today. I'd like to introduce everybody right now. Before we dive into that though, actually, if you have not jumped into the chat yet, everyone jump in and say where you're from. The greatest asset that we have in the ethics and compliance community is the uniqueness of this community. Many of you are pillars of this community, and it's such a great asset for us to tap into and to feed off each other and to share, but that only comes through communication and connection. So during this session, I'd love everyone to ask questions. Put those in bold or send them directly to Alyssa and maybe she can pass those over to me. We want this to be a really organic conversation. Everyone's very busy. They have a to-do list as long as their arm, and you've carved out time, and we want this to be really valuable time for you. So this is gonna be an organic conversation. We're gonna be on this session talking about some of the main pillars of a program like this, but again, the more interactive, the better. So with that, I'd like to first introduce Beth. How you doing, Beth? Wave to everybody. Beth is in Denver. She's drinking a Starbucks, and Beth is at CDM Smith. It's an architecture engineering consultant. And what you're going to see right now, the people on this panel are from all different industries, all different sizes, many international, and they all have had really great experiences in building these kinds of programs. So I think you're really gonna love this panel. So Beth is from it's an architecture and engineering consulting firm with about 5,500 employees. They have 80 offices in 25 countries. And what you're also going to see a common thread is that everyone has been in trouble, not Beth in particular or Mary in particular, but their organizations have. And as a result of getting out of that trouble, they've had to put some best practices into place. Hey, Beth, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Nick.
Next, we have Mary. She's from Fresenius. You all should know Mary because the Great Women in Compliance podcast should be top of your podcast rotation. Mary works at Fresenius. It's a healthcare organization, Fortune 500 company. They have 120,000 employees globally, and they're in 70,000 in the US, and they're in a ton of different countries. Mary has helped Fresenius usher through a monitorship and that it's a interesting DOJ plus SEC monitorship. So she's gonna have some really great things to add for us. How you doing, Mary? Next, we have Deb. Deb is from Qualcomm. Qualcomm is a tech company with 45,000 employees. They have 170 offices in more than 30 different countries. They're NASDAQ listed, so it's a public company. And they've worked through an antitrust and FCPA settlement. So she has some great kind of experience in the trenches. Hey, Deb, how's it going?
Hey, good morning.
And finally, the man, Anthony, coming, he wakes up like this. Can you imagine? Anthony is worked at Starbucks. They have 140,000 at last I checked, 140,000 employees across 32,000 locations, which is a really difficult thing to manage, that massive distribution of workforce in 80 countries. And he has some really great insights as well. So how's it going, Anthony?
Oh, good morning, everyone.
All right, so again, as I said, we want this to be conversational. Use maybe some emojis so I can find these comments or these questions beyond the comments. And we can interweave those in. But with that, we're really going to focus today on tangible ideas, and we're going to focus on tactics that you can take action on. And so I just want to just dive right in. So Deb, talk to us about what this concept is. Give us the primer on an ethics ambassador program.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. Many companies have different objectives for these programs, so I'll speak to what we were trying to accomplish. Ethics and compliance is a non-revenue generating function. So as you can imagine, most of us have pretty lean organizations. Even when the company has been in trouble, I mean, I feel very fortunate to have the resources that I do have, but it's never enough. The company operates in all time zones. So we have a centralized program that most of our resources were in San Diego, and it becomes really, really hard to support the international offices because we do our day shift and then China gets online at 5, so we start another shift. So our ethics, well, we refer to it as our ethics liaison program, was intended to help us build relationships with our remote offices. That was our #1 priority. I think most that are in the field see that you can customize your program to your to the country where your employees are off you're going to be, because if you're using examples and processes that resonate with them, you know, that they understand how it affects their daily work activities, you're going to have a much better chance of inducing compliance. And so we just looked at areas where we had 100 or more employees in a remote office, and we said, okay, we're going to target a liaison for that office so that we, again, could have a connection there that has real-time information about what's going on. Someone that would reach out to us, you know, very quickly when something was coming up that they thought, you know, could have compliance implications. So those were some of our initial objectives. But they do so much for us. They review policy updates, look at translations. We've had times where we did our translations in the US, and then the employees in that office would come back to us and say, do you know what this says? And we were like, oh, you know, so translations matter. And so our ethics liaisons help us to make sure that our translations make sense. If we're using business case examples, we want to use examples of how business operates in that country, because business customs and cultures are real and they matter when it comes to how business is conducted in that country. So, you know, our liaisons are educating us. We have compliance committees in each region that we operate in. And so we've added that liaison to each of those committees so that they can help us with the agenda for our quarterly meetings. You know, but again, at the end of the day, it's just so that we can understand what's going on in that country. We can make sure that our program is tailored to how business is conducted in that country, and so that we are getting real-time information from a business that we consider to be, you know, medium or high risk. Generally, if we have very low risk activities going in a country, we wouldn't invest in an ethics liaison, at least not yet. Our program is fairly small. So as we grow, we may start adding liaisons in some of those countries. But for right now, we're taking a risk-based approach and looking at size of our population in that country, and then what types of activities are going on that could have compliance implications. So with that, I'll stop. Sorry.
No, very good. That's great. So it's kind of a network that you have across the entire planet of people that can be sort of splinter cells in these different sort of risk areas. And it seems like they can be kind of a two-way street, sort of a, I don't know, a conductor or a responder to some degree.
And they have relationships with management in those countries, so they sort of help to bridge. We have good relationships with folks that we are in the same office with, but when you're talking about people in China, India, we have people in Ukraine right now. It takes time to build those relationships, and when you have an ethics liaison, that kind of accelerates that process because they become your advocate for the program in that country.
So, and how do you compensate these guys? Do you give them a couple of extra bucks? Are they recognized? I mean, compensation comes in more than just dollars. How do you take care of that angle?
So first of all, choose selectively. You do need to have liaisons that actually understand the business that's going on in that country. In order for them to be the most effective for you, for the compliance organization to understand what's going on there, your liaison has to understand. So we do a couple of things. We have a Lead the Way program where annually we recognize employees that we consider to be champions, ethics champions, and our ethics liaisons are even one step above our champions. So we recognize them every year during International Compliance Week, introduce them. As I mentioned, we added them to our regional compliance committees, which are comprised of the president for the region, the head finance person, head HR person, internal audit. I'm sure I'm missing a group. So generally, these folks are at a lower level than the management team in that country. So I also think from a career standpoint, this gives them good exposure to the executives in that country. So they're usually pretty excited to be, added to that committee. And we do give them time on the agenda, so they're able to, have a speaking part. So those are some of the ways we have thought about compensation, but we've not gotten that far yet. So again, it's more just part of our standard ethics and compliance recognition program where, we send them a formal letter to say, you've been selected. The president of the region has endorsed, your selection. And, again, we try to give them kudos whenever we can, but it's not financial. It's mostly just, exposure and recognizing them whenever we have an opportunity.
And I think we often lose sight of that we say, well, I don't have budget to get something like this started because I can't compensate everybody. But, at some level, we all want to live in a workplace that's ethical, and we want to be, an integrity forward, catalyst. And just allowing someone to take advantage of that kind of an opportunity from a leadership standpoint or from an exposure standpoint, many times people are willing to do that. Beth, let's talk a little bit about launching one of these things. You have a really interesting story on how you came into the role that you were in, and they didn't have anything in place. So let's just kind of dive in and say, hey, I have a clean slate, so to speak, in terms of one of these programs. How do you launch it? How do you get it going?
Yeah, good question, Nick. So, when I joined CD & Smith 6 years ago, they were setting up a program. And like Nick alluded to earlier, there were some issues and the company needed to resolve them. And it was very interesting because when I first interviewed for the position, and because it's brand new, the CEO then said, well, how many people do you have to hire? Because as Deb pointed out, we're an overhead function, right? We don't make money for the most part, though I'm figuring that out in some fashion, but we're not a P&L. So this company knew they needed help. They were very leery about, okay, she's going to have 25 people on her staff or whatnot. And I told them no, because we utilize this compliance ambassador program. Within CD & Smith, we call them compliance champions, compliance ambassadors. But to set it up, because that's what this session's about, right? Is why are we setting it up and what's the business case for doing so? This is how you operationalize compliance. That's what I've told these folks. I said, look, I don't own compliance. Our compliance officers don't own compliance. It's the people in the organization that own compliance. So when I first got in there and I started doing, the hallmarks of an effective compliance program, and here are the elements we need. One of the biggest things I said is, but we need the people. And in order to have the people to carry it out, I said, we've got to look around the organization and see who are the people you consider leaders. So first of all, we use this as a leadership opportunity, much like what Deb was talking about. We don't pay them any extra. And people always ask me that question, but there is a lot more to it. So we put this function around having compliance ambassadors who are not only going to do all the similar things that Deb talked about that they do, but they're the ones who are really responsible for the day-to-day interface. So when I approached the management team about this idea, so I'm there for, about a year, setting up standards and, taking policies, procedures. And I said, okay, now to really get this going, we need compliance. And they, so what does that mean? That means for us, we need people, again, I said it before, leadership opportunity, and people who are already at some level of leadership, because let's face it, compliance is at the top. We talk about that all the time. If you don't have that, it's not going to work. So what we did in our program is take a look at managing directors and people who are already in our countries who are in a leadership position. And we say to them, okay, now here's this double hat you're going to wear. And here's what you're responsible for. So we've got all the ways that we'll have lots of people today and tomorrow talk about, the specific duties and how they're compensated, how you pick them. But what I want to focus on is the why. And the why is to really pull people together to understand the only way compliance works is to be owned by the business units and to be owned by the functional areas. That's not something you can do right away. Obviously, it takes time because I'm building this program. I've been here 6 years now, and I'll tell you, the difference is our CEO remarked about the board meeting is we were talking about in one of our foreign countries where we had the managing director was constantly being asked by the client, who was a governmental entity, to provide laptops, iPads, things that were not within the purview or the scope, or things like they would go to a workshop on the coast somewhere and they would want us to pay for 3 days instead of 2 days. In this instance, our managing director, who had served as a compliance ambassador for me when he was in another area and was now in this area working with other people, though, he said right away, no, hard no, just no gray, right? We figured out where we were going to just say no before coming back and asking for more permission. Now, I'm not going to say it's black and white. We know compliance is not always black and white, a lot of gray. But our CEO talked to the board about how, 6 years ago, there would have been probably decisions made and they would have done it. But we have raised the awareness so that the business unit owns it. They don't call Beth and ask permission anymore, which is what they used to do. So that's
It's a way to get some work off your plate even. That's great.
absolutely.
So was it like a real light bulb moment when you started to frame this out as, we need this tone at the top, we need this sort of ethical base, but the mood at the middle is really what's going to build this compliance pyramid that's going to be a stable, shape for us. What was that light bulb moment like, and when did you start kind of planting those seeds in the minds of leadership?
Well, I'll have to say, it wasn't at this company. I mean, I've worked for a couple of firms, and it was probably one of the other companies that I worked for where this light bulb moment came off. Because I'll admit, like many of us on the phone, we on this call, we didn't go to school to be a compliance person, right? We all fell into it. I was an attorney, in-house counsel, and was asked to do a rotational assignment. So I'll admit, when I first got into this, it's like 15 years ago, I'm scratching my head trying to think, okay, what do we do and how do we measure it? As an attorney, give me the law, give me the facts, and I apply it. Compliance is not like that. And I think it was the moment when I finally met some of the compliance ambassadors that we had talked to about what do you face? And here's the other most important thing. I think as an effective compliance officer, if you're going to build relationships within the business unit, you have to go to that business unit.
Right.
You have to sit, talk to them. So I think the wow moment, like you said, is sitting in one of our project sites in Dubai, talking to these field engineers, and they start telling me things they're encountering day to day, but because of the leadership from local, and they were able to resolve it, and they were thanking me for it. That was the light bulb moment.
Love it. Thank you. So Mary, let's talk a little bit about, you said something during our pre-show, and you said, there's really, I'm going to paraphrase this, but there's really kind of no excuse to not do something like this. If you can get a formal system, then great, but an indirect approach can often work, maybe even more effectively. Talk to us a little bit about like not making a scene approach.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Nick. And hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. Great comments from Deb and Beth, and they've obviously put a lot of effort into creating a disciplined, regimented, formal ambassador program. And I want to speak as well to the people in the room who are like, oh my goodness, I don't have this, or, oh, I don't have time to put something formal in place. I've got 3 ideas for you. And the great news is even if you have a formal program, you can use these takeaways as well. So the first thing I want to share with you is consider creating focus groups with colleagues that'll help you be consultation and provide input for your new initiatives. One of my greatest lessons learned in compliance is that I involved the business way too late sometimes. And I used to think it was enough to pilot a new initiative on a safe country like maybe Canada or Singapore. And I realized way too late compared with when I should have, that actually we ask our colleagues to involve us early and often, and the least we can do is offer that same decency in return. So think about pulling together what is essentially an advisory group of colleagues, have them opt into this, who's passionate about it, share with them some of the topics and the types of work streams that you'll be wanting to get their feedback on, and then pull together those groups. The second thing I wanted to talk to you about was consider taking your compliance influencers, people in the business who are really listened to and respected by others, and think about taking ethics and compliance quotes that they're willing to provide to you and dotting them throughout your documentation. And for an example of a company that has done this really nicely in real life, I encourage you to take a look at the McDonald's Supplier Code of Conduct. That is a fantastic best practice document, but it also really helps with an example of showing tone from the top across the whole organization and getting your compliance influencers involved with very little effort and work on their behalf. And again, you don't need a formal compliance ambassador program to do this. And the third idea I wanted to share with you, which is actually a 2-for-1 idea, it'll help you level up your tone from the top in your compliance training, as well as invoke compliance ambassador influence, which is to think about your annual compliance training. And for years now, we have invited our CEOs to do a little video, or in our policies to have their professional headshot and a word from them espousing their support for our training, the compliance function, for ethics, for integrity. But here's the thing, we're getting them to do this every year and they're kind of saying the same thing. But the worst part is, if they're turning up to our training in the first place, if they're putting their mugshot in our documentation, it goes without saying that they stand by us, they support us, and we have their tone from the top. So let's not waste any moment of time, because for every minute we spend in a training, that's not just the compliance cost of us paying for that training, but it's also the opportunity cost. Every 1 minute we take away to do compliance training is a minute we take away from the core job that they've been hired to do. Compliance training is important, but let's take seriously this opportunity we have to be on a stage that is very costly. So here's my idea for you. Instead of getting the CEO to parrot that same old stuff over and over, instead take a learning objective from your training this year and get them to teach on that instead. So they essentially become adjunct professors in compliance. And you can replicate this with your compliance influencers in the business as well. And the reason being is that having tone from the top is fantastic, but we know that studies show people are most influenced by the people that are their direct supervisors above them. So let's not just get tone from the top. Let's also get tone from them above and all around, and incorporate our colleagues in our trainings and have them bring their own personal anecdotes and stories to bring our training to life. And that, in a couple of minutes, is how you can do an informal ambassador program and level up your tone from the top at the very same time.
Well, you can really multiply the impact, and you're also going to get so many sort of cross-pollination benefits, like Deb was talking about, by getting someone to review a policy that might not be translated right. That is, that's that's blaringly apparent when we're translating from language to language, but there's also a language of a particular division, or there's a language of a particular culture, or even of a particular team. When you can get someone to kind of jump into that and put those things in their own words, not only does it reinforce this message as something that's a lot more palatable and more digestible, but it again gives you that added credibility and that added dimension to the once a year thing. I just love it, and it's another way to really create some leverage. Anthony, what do these ambassadors do? We're getting a lot of questions in the chat, which we'll circle back to, but I'd love to kind of dive in. You have a really interesting framework. The thing that you've been a part of building at Starbucks is extremely complex because you have these high risk areas, these low risk areas, these retail areas, these corporate areas. Talk to us a little bit about what do these folks do and what considerations do you have in these different sort of jurisdiction types?
Sure, thank you. A lot of great ideas here. And I will add, like Deb described, Starbucks program is actually fairly small and still growing. So the examples I provide are just that, examples. And I think what's instructive is sort of the thought process that goes into creating them or implementing them. So as others described, our ethics ambassadors, as we call them, are liaisons to the business. They are operators, so they're not ethics and compliance folks or legal folks or HR folks. They come from the business. And part of the reason for that is they can speak the language of the business, either literally or figuratively, because they're experts in the business. They know the business, they know its risks, they know the controls in place to mitigate those risks. And then obviously they should have demonstrated a commitment to ethics and our values and demonstrated employee care. As you know, Starbucks, I think most people probably know Starbucks. It's a small coffee shop. We have a number of small coffee shops. It's a retail business for the most part. You might be surprised to find we actually have not focused our program on the retail part of the business for a couple of reasons. One, the ethics risks that are presented to the employees in the stores are relatively low. Also, because that is the primary part of our business, it is very well resourced in many other ways. Our employees, I'm probably going to say partners at some point because that's what we call them. So if I say partners, you know what I mean. Our employees in the stores know very much about ethics and compliance, reach out to us directly. They've got access to 2 different branches of human resources. So they've got resources and they know how to use them. So overall, their risk profile is fairly low. Where we might add ethics ambassadors to our retail program is with the lower level managers. Something we're thinking about, we haven't done it yet, so invite us back in a year or so and we may talk about it again. But there's some opportunity because they're generally newer managers or newer in role. Suddenly have a lot more responsibility for finances, for managing other people, and therefore a lot more opportunity to do something that may be unethical. So that's where we kind of think we could add some value with an ethics ambassador program for retail. And probably it would be an ethics ambassador somewhere at their level, because again, something about newer managers is they don't like to ask for help because that shows vulnerability. So if the ethics ambassador were more of a peer to them, that's where we think it could add the most value. So now let's switch to our non-retail population. That's where we think that there is some risk because they've got different jobs that may pose different ethical risks. We've also found that they may be less aware of those risks and also less aware of the resources available to them for mitigating that risk. The non-retail part of our business spans many aspects. From supply chain to construction of stores to finance and different levels of risk. So there again, we look at the risk. I'll use one example, supply chain. Not to pick on supply chain at Starbucks, but that's an industry in general that's very complex and has opportunity throughout for corruption. Not to mention the span of employees within that business unit ranges from production workers who might be roasting coffee to engineers who are designing and monitoring the machines for roasting the coffee to quality assurance folks who are literally food scientists. That's all in one business unit. So you've got to have an ethics ambassador who is familiar with all of the various risks those present, knows that part of the business very well. So perhaps a narrow but deep knowledge of that part of the business, and then is able to connect authentically with a wide range of employees. So that's an example of where we have focused on risk in the business unit. Quickly, I'll jump over to how we've got ethics ambassadors in a market as opposed to a business unit. An ethics ambassador in a market is not so much focused on a narrow and deep view of a particular business unit, but rather an entire market. And I'll give one quick example. In our Hong Kong office, we have an ethics ambassador, even though he supports only about 200 employees. But that's because they manage Starbucks business through licensees in many different markets in Asia Pacific. So they're navigating many different corporate cultures that may have an ability to dilute Starbucks culture, and they're navigating many different ethics or ethnic and national cultures. And to make it more interesting, many of the employees in the Hong Kong office are Starbucks employees who are expats from other parts of Starbucks from other parts of the world. So they bring their variations of Starbucks culture as well as their own ethnic and national cultures to this very small office. So there's a potential to have a sort of group of untethered employees. So what we found is that it's very important to have a unified corporate culture in that office. That's a great opportunity for an ethics ambassador whose focus is less on any particular part of the business and more in unifying the whole.
So I'm seeing kind of a theme across a lot of these answers, you know, kind of take a risk-based approach, see where your real hot zones are, try to leverage local leadership in the areas that are, you know, that are in those kind of hot zones, particularly people that are kind of in the foxhole with the other folks, and try to reinforce these principles across different business types or activity types. So I want to dive in. We have a bunch of great questions. Thanks for sharing that, Anthony. The scope of your program and the considerations, actually across all of these speakers so far, has been everything I hoped for. So this has been phenomenal. I want to dive in to do a bunch of grab bag questions. We have a ton of questions in the chat. So in these last 12 to 15 minutes, I'm just going to be firing them out. So let's go. So what do you think the typical time commitment is for your ambassadors or your liaisons? What do you kind of expect from them? Beth, why don't we start with you?
We usually tell them 5 to 10% of their time.
Interesting.
That's how we set it up.
Is that markedly different for anybody else? I guess it could be even less if you use Mary's kind of best practice, because it's just a little bit of time for someone to go on and do a course or do a video. How about you, Deb and Anthony? Similar?
We told them at the start 5%, and it could grow depending on what we have going on in that country, but we had to have them commit to at least that much of their time. And we also had to get management buy-in that they were okay with that employee dedicating that much time.
So Anthony said something when he said how they kind of select people, there's people that have exhibited, customer care or employee care, and they kind of live out the values. Beth and Mary and Deb, how do you go about kind of selecting your ethics ambassadors, and how do you do diligence on them to make sure that you're not picking the wrong person that might come back to haunt you? How do you make a better decision there?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that first. So when I talked about we set this up, well, the first thing we do actually, so let's talk about a region, Australia. The first thing I do is I'll go to the head of that country. And I'll say, okay, here's what I'm looking for. I do have a job description. I noticed that was one of the questions. So I have a job description that I present to the executive management committee. And so let me, if I can get a little backing up, our executive management committee is comprised of all of us who directly report to our CEO as well as the business unit heads. That's the first place I started when I presented this idea on what we wanted to do and emphasized that I needed their buy-in and support, and that I was going to ask for nominations. Then I would go to the area, and so Australia, ask for a nomination from that country manager. And I actually ask 2 names. I don't want just one, I want 2 names. And then I take that and we do a little bit of background checking ourselves, take a look, has there ever been any complaints or anything about them? Then we go to the unit president, talk to them about it. And then that person is chosen that way. That's how we pick them. And then we approach that person then, because, this is going on in the background. That person might not even know they're being considered. Then once that happens, we have that person's direct manager go to them and say, look, I have nominated you for this honor. And that's how we present it to him. It gets his job description and said, if you accept this, this is considered part of your leadership rotation you will be valued. It'll come up in your performance appraisal. We'll take into consideration the fact that you took that on, and as well as in bonus time. So that's how we do it.
What would you add to that, Mary?
Yeah, and I love the idea, and I want to emphasize this because a question came up in the chat about selling the time commitment. One of the things that Beth's company has done really well is that they have crafted the branding, the marketing, and the reputation of being a compliance champion as being a role of prestige. It is something that is highly sought after in their company. And so in order for that to be successful, you really need to start that from the very beginning and get the buy-in from the C-suite that they agree with you and they're going to help you push that is what the role is really about, that it's a special role. It is not a chore or an extra duty. It is something that shows your promotional value. In terms of your question about how are we doing due diligence, one of the benefits of kind of running this ad hoc approach where you slot in jigsaw puzzle pieces as you see them is that sometimes I kind of want my more fast and loose people in the mix. So for example, I wouldn't necessarily want a very tricky sales guy that looked to circumvent a lot of processes all the time as maybe being my role model giving integrity quotes, but I do want him or her in my focus group because they're going to be my challenge community, right? Like if I'm going to roll out something, I want people to tell me early before I have the embarrassment of, rolling it out publicly and having the whole company throwing tomatoes at me. You want them challenging you right at the beginning.
Right.
And then for the people that I really want to be my halo shining star folks that are involved in my videos and my tone from the top, they're the people that you tend more often to self-select. And I do them based on conversations where people come up to me with really thoughtful compliance discussions. So my medical director in Mexico, for example, the first time I visited them and we talked about sponsorship, he asked for more time with me to ruminate on how we can do medical sponsorships more thoughtfully. And I knew at the beginning that he was going to be an ally because he wasn't trying to hide anything from me. He was volunteering his thoughts and really coming to a measured, proportionate place where I felt like he was balancing any kind of business development and interest in medical sponsorship with compliance risk. So having conversations and you soliciting people for the role, and Beth talked about nominating, having other colleagues who are on the ground for Anthony in Hong Kong, getting those colleagues who are really right there and having the day-to-day interactions can be another great way to have referrals put forward. And that doesn't mean that you wouldn't necessarily not do any further checking. You might want to speak to the head of that country just to get their view on that person's performance or adherence and commitment to values. But I think those are a few ideas that I would suggest are how I've gone about doing it and identifying my stakeholders in the past for these projects.
I love it. And, getting that endorsement from the top, that's not that hard of a thing, first of all, because what leader doesn't want a team full of people that are trying to reinforce the culture that they're at least saying that they care about? That's a really important one to run with. Let me ask you guys this. When you're choosing leadership for your program, do you ever worry about them using their new position to gloss over issues involving them or their management? Like, do you ever worry about someone gaming the role itself? How do you guard against that kind of a thing?
I think just in terms of who's being selected for these roles, I think that's where I saw kind of the biggest difference between all of the speakers, because it really depends on the program. I feel like we've had the benefit of, from a maturity standpoint, our program's been, in the works for about 10 years. And we started 6 years ago trying to launch one of these programs, and we sort of had a false start. We did let the local management team select and select the candidates for us. And we just ended up finding that they didn't know enough about how things worked in that country. They were too low level. So when we tried to launch again 2 years ago, we actually as a team said, who is our go-to in these countries already? I mean, they know what's going on. They're the right hand of one of the leaders in that country. So, they're sort of in the circle, in the tiny, tiny circle of decision making there, regardless of title. So it is literally different in every country. We have HR in one country, we have quality in another country, and these are all employees that have just exhibited a passion toward integrity, you know, in everything that we do. So this time around, it was actually pretty easy because now we've had 10 years of experience. How do we get information from that country? Who do we expect to provide the most amount of value and cooperation? And so it was kind of a no-brainer. And in terms of time commitment, they were already spending that much time with us. So I guess those are just a few things that I'll add about our program that may be different from others. You know, I think it just depends. I like buy-in from the top. Like I said, even if we have selected the candidate, we're still going to the president of the region and saying, do you agree, you know, that this employee can spend some additional time on ethics and compliance matters? Do you agree that they're well qualified for that kind of role? So we are getting buy-in, but, you know, I just, for us, it's not about title or even function. It's really that person that demonstrates just a passion and commitment toward ethics. So,
and there are people like that throughout your entire organization. This is a very romantic thing. Everyone wants to leave the world better. We want to make the world a better place. And it's not going to be that hard to find those people. And for those right people, this 5 or 10% extra is not going to be that big of a commitment. They're going to be happy to do it because they're just looking for an opportunity to do it. Many of us have been chewed up and spit out by different organizations that don't care about this kind of stuff. And we want the organization that we're in to actually care about it. So there's a massive opportunity there, and we shouldn't let that fear. So in the last couple of minutes, or we shouldn't let that fear kind of prevent us. You know, Mary just made a great point that this could be a good qualitative data analytics mining opportunity as well. And I think that's absolutely true. For the last couple of minutes, I'd like to do a little round robin with our panelists and talk about, if you could do it all over again, what's the biggest lesson that you learned? What is one thing that you would avoid doing? You know, because there's, you know, hundreds of people in this audience who are trying to kind of get some best practices. So what pitfalls did you hit that you would want to steer clear of if you were able to do it all again? Let's start with you, Anthony.
Sure. I would say be very intentional and very focused on what you're trying to achieve. One mistake that we had made early on was we focused too much on the ethics advisor piece of it because we were focused on an increase in reports to our helpline about misconduct by executives. And then there were a couple of substantiated reports. So we really focused on, okay, we need to provide another resource to our employees so that they feel comfortable reporting these types of misconduct. Turns out those were sort of a blip. Not to minimize them, but we sort of over-indexed on that need and didn't index so much on just the value of having someone in the business who can promote company values and promote ethics. So we sort of refocused after we realized that we kind of focused a bit too much on one thing. And then I guess the other part is just the flexibility. Know that you're going to have to change your program probably, even though consistency is key, flexibility also is as well.
Very good. So that intentionality is critical. Beth, what about you? What are the big pitfalls that you would avoid if you could do it all over again?
So the first time around at the first company I worked with that this went into play is we underestimated how much connection they needed to the mothership, so to speak. Because we do these compliance ambassadors on our foreign locations. We think, okay, we'll send them once a month some stuff, and we have quarterly meetings and phone calls. They really need a whole lot more early on until you get comfortable with them. And I really suggest that you bake time in to have one-on-ones with every ambassador as much.
Yeah, I think it's probably smarter to kind of overcorrect for that and then pull back than it is to try to embed it further because the train might be off the tracks at that point. Deb, how about you? What are your last big takeaways for everyone here?
I did want to address the question on, do we worry about them using the role to sort of potentially hide or, mislead things that they're involved in? And I have to say that has absolutely never been an issue, but we also had about 8 years of experience with these individuals. So there really were no surprises in that aspect. I think everyone in that country recognizes the person that was selected as kind of the go-to, the person that wants to make sure everything's the right way. So we never had any issues like that. But in our recognition program, we did have some of those issues because we have visibility to ethics issues, but we don't necessarily have visibility to HR matters that are going on. And so we've had employees that were nominated by another employee, and we were like, oh, great, the write-up is great. And then, at some point it came out that that employee was using this recognition, to sort of overcome the HR issue. So we certainly don't want that to happen. So now we do have all of our recognition, our candidates that are being recognized, reviewed both from a compliance and an HR standpoint, just to make sure that, recognition that we're giving doesn't become sort of a shield or a risk for the company. But our ambassadors, that has not been an issue. So, but we have a lot of experience with them beforehand. So
yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, we have to, we can't be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about it. We have to be smart, and also kind of guard against that, because the opportunity for someone to game it is there. Okay, Mary, final word, final best practice or issue to avoid for us.
To Anthony's point, not relying so much on the advisory piece, I really think a lot of that should still stick with team compliance because we're the SMEs, and focusing more on the liaison piece and thinking about it as a two-way feedback mechanism to get that input and consultation on what we're doing from the people on the front lines earlier. That's what I would do differently if I had my time again.
Amazing. Well, you guys, thank you so much. This time went so quick. I feel like we could talk about this for another 45, maybe even 90 minutes, but round of applause for our panelists. If you guys loved it, drop a 1 in the chat. We're trying to get to 100 ones. So drop a 1 in the chat to show the panelists how much you appreciated their tactics. And yeah, looking forward to the next group. So thank you guys. Thank you, Mary, Anthony, Deb and Beth. That was really awesome. It really exceeded. Look at all these ones, you guys. We're getting close to 100 here already. Very good. Okay, Alyssa, the floor is yours, I guess.
Yes. So thank you so much, you all, for joining us. That was a really good segment to the first session. Our next segment is with Shanon, Harmon, Tony Lynn Langfeld, Sean Senti, and Mike Santos. If you give me a moment, I'm going to spotlight them. But in the meantime, whoever wants to speak first, if you could, so I can find you and I'll spotlight you.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Santos, and I am the Director of Ethics and Business Standards here at Orange and Rockland Utilities. And I have the pleasure of representing to you all the programs that we have, the ambassador programs that we have at both Orange and Rockland and Con Edison, because Orange and Rockland is a subsidiary of Con Edison. And we do have slightly kind of different programs, but all with the same intention, all with the same kind of programming as well. So I'm happy to be here, and I'll let my fellow presenters represent themselves and introduce themselves, and then we'll dive in, because I think it was a really perfect segue that we were ending on kind of a lot of the questions on how we're selecting our ambassadors, and so that's what we're here to talk about today. So leave it to my fellow presenters.
All right, let me thank you, Mike. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, it's kind of a great transition for us to naturally start talking about this thing, because that was a pretty good frame out. But now we're going to dive deeper on some tactics about the selection process, because I think it can really make or break the success of your program. So I want to introduce everybody else. We have Sean Senti. He's the ethics program consultant and principal at PG&E. We just met Mike. Mike, how's it going? We have Tony Lynn. She's a senior advisor of ethics and compliance in corporate and affiliate compliance at SCE, and Shanon Harmon, senior advisor of operational excellence at SCE. How's everyone doing today?
Good. Good morning.
Good. Great, Mike. So I want to, if you guys had some questions about the selection process from the last session, there's a mountain of ones, so I can't scroll through those. So drop those back in to the chat, and we'll start circling up on those. But I'd like to kind of open the floor first to Sean, and I'd like you to start kind of talking about the selection process and what some of those initial considerations are. What are those big picture pillars that kind of guide your selection process as you start thinking about building out an ambassador program like this?
Yeah, I think it's really important before you start getting into the nuts and bolts to just sort of set guideposts or North Star for what you want your program to look like and who you want to be a part of it. And so at Pacific Gas and Electric, we really have two driving influences that we just, anytime we reach a decision point where we're not sure of what to do, this is what we go back to, right? These are the things that we use to to guide our decisions. And one of those is that we believe everybody in the company, regardless of level, position, title, any of that, everybody in the company has a right to have a voice on our ethics council. That's what our program is called. There are a number of reasons why we think that's important, and we've had different iterations of the program over the years where it's been more leadership heavy. We think it works best when it represents the company. So we have all levels represented. The other piece, or the other kind of pillar for us, is making sure that the makeup of our council closely as possible mirrors the makeup of the company. So for example, if your company is 66% union represented employees, which ours happens to be, we want our council to have 66% union represented employees. We've never got it perfect. It's hard to do, but again, it just kind of helps guide our decisions. So I would say pick a couple things that you want your ethics ambassador program to have, and that will help guide your decisions on how you find the people to be a part of your program.
And tell me, Sean, about some of the reasons behind that, that criterion. Why is that important, and what are some of the benefits you guys have seen from that as you've tried to push toward that sort of ratio, whether it's union or I would imagine sex or race or whatever?
Yeah, so I think we use our program as sort of a dual purpose program. We do some guidance where we're kicking ideas to them and asking for feedback and helping build policies. And it just makes sense in that context that you would want the people who are going to be building policies, providing feedback on charter, whatever that we're asking them to respond to, that it would look like the company, right? So that you've got a good representative sample. If it's too leadership heavy, if there's too many men, you're not getting the voice of the company really in that particular case. And then the other reason is it feels like the right thing to do to make sure that you've got that sort of makeup. In terms of having everybody having a voice, if we have more people interested in joining than we have space for them. And I think part of that is, some of the folks in the earlier session were talking about the prestige of being an ambassador on the council, or, whatever the program is called. And I think it's a really cool growth opportunity for people who are individual contributors. We want to provide that opportunity for folks, and this is a really easy way to do that.
That's great. Tony Lynn, thanks for sharing that, Sean. So Tony Lynn, talk to us a little bit about some of your guiding principles from a selection basis.
Yeah, so, when we first launched this program in 2018, we actually held a company-wide campaign for folks to nominate their peers, or they could certainly nominate themselves. And ultimately, when we looked at the pool, we wanted to make sure that there was no red flags in their personnel files, whether they were a part of a substantiated allegation. So those folks were weeded out of the selection process. But ultimately, we did work with the organization's leadership at the VP level to confirm who these candidates would be, to represent their organization. And so there's basically 4 questions that we want to make sure that our leaders think about before ultimately selecting them. So first, does this person create a positive work environment? Basically, how does the employee influence or create a positive work environment that reflects our 6 company values? So we always look to that. Second, do people value the employee's opinion or point of view? You want to make sure that they are credible, respectable. Third, their approachability. Is the employee an individual that employees would feel comfortable going to? It's really important to form that rapport with your peers, with leaders. You want to make sure that that is there at the foundational level. And then lastly, can they serve as a liaison? Are they comfortable with, are leaders comfortable with them speaking on their behalf? Whether it be about company policies, the work environment, things like that. So those are the 4 questions that we want to think about before ultimately selecting our ambassadors.
So tell me some more about that 4th question. What are you actually looking for in that? Is it that they can speak in front of people? Is it that their desk isn't messy? What are we looking for there?
we want to make sure first that they're credible, that that they're reputable. We want to make sure that when we pick someone, an employee is not going to go, why on earth is is that person representative of my organization? Because just like was mentioned in the earlier session, I mean, this is kind of a prestige sort of position, and you want to make sure that who we choose puts a good light on the program as a whole. So are they knowledgeable about the resources out there in the company? Employees know, oh, I have a question, I can go to my ambassador, and they will either clarify the question that I might have or refer me to the right person so that I can get the answers that I need.
So Shannon, you and Tony Lynn work together. What would you add to that sort of to some of those high points that Tony Lynn just shared with us?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Good morning, everyone. When we choose people or we work with leaders across the company, it's really allowing them to choose the representatives, the values ambassadors. So we call it the values ambassadors programs. They're individuals reinforcing values-based behaviors across the company. So we've got the ethics piece in there, but we also got that they are individuals who can communicate effectively and communicate change and why changes are occurring, and really fostering that positive, productive work environment that we want to create across the company. We broke this down very selectively. It's like, just like Sean is mentioning, a proportional representation across the company. So I think what's unique about our program is we not only looked at OU, but we looked at work location or site facilities.
What's OU? What is it?
Sorry, yeah. So operational unit or business unit.
Okay.
Yep. So that we had people across our service territory that were representative of their peers.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you for sharing that, Mike. Talk to us a little bit about how you guys think about it at your organization, and maybe give me some feedback on what you've heard from your fellow panelists.
Sure. So I can kind of, again, I'm representing kind of both voices for the Con Edison companies and for Orange and Rockland. So in terms of ambassador selection, I think we take a very similar approach to many of you. At the Con Edison program is called the Values and Action Advisors. So the VIAs, as I'll use a shorthand. For the VIAs, they represent the 33 organizations that are within Con Edison. Con Edison, our transmission company, and our clean energy businesses. And they are 33 organizations. They represent both management and union very much to be representative. Of course, we've had some issues with trying to court or attract union employees just because of the commitments. But I think that's a challenge that's getting better as the program is kind of maturing. That program was started in 2012 and has just steadily been growing and growing with our partners down at Con Edison, really keeping an eye on it. And with their strategy, it's a vice president nomination. And it's sold as, or it's marketed as a leadership opportunity for those, as many mentioned, those who are already leaders and kind of rising stars in their organizations. But sometimes you have that kind of quiet person who really maybe needs an opportunity to be that leader in the organization. They may not have that title, they may not have, that function, but it's someone who maybe people recognize as someone who goes to, yeah.
Well, I mean, those kind of people are such an opportunity many times, absolutely. And they get passed over, but they can be such a, a physical reinforcement or a physical example of these, this embodiment of these values that we want to, live out every day.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then when it comes to the Orange and Rockland side, the Business Ethics Council side, we certainly will take a nomination from someone, and we actually do take a different strategy when it comes to our union folks, because again, in that attempt to get more union folks involved, we actually have it that every year we are approaching our union leadership and asking them for some nominations for representatives to come. And we've had shop stewards, we've had business agents, people who would are kind of natural leaders among their groups. But we also allow for self-nominations at Orange and Rockland. And we find that a lot of people, because of now how our program has been around for almost 30 years, actually.
Wow.
It preceded the merger between Con Edison and Orange and Rockland. So it was formed out of the ethics office also being formed. Much like I'm sure many of you have had in your histories, there were some scandalous issues here. An ethics office was formed, and then the council was actually formed as a natural partner to extend the ethics office. And that's really how we, on both company programs, that's how we really see our ambassadors. They have to be an extension of our program, and so therefore have that background. So we do the same as all vetting within all of the investigations groups. If there is an issue with an active ambassador, we will have to speak with that person to see and have, I can share with you, I've had to have discussions with ambassadors to formally ask them to resign because of negative findings from one of the investigations groups. So I think maybe coming from a different angle, we as leaders of ambassadors programs have to be ready to have kind of those conversations with our ambassadors as well.
Interesting that you have these two different programs that have some different angles. One of them's, really, old. It's been around for a long time. As this merger has happened, how have you seen sort of each program change, and what sort of cross-pollination were you able to utilize, the best from one to the other and so forth?
Yeah, so actually, we are now doing a lot more kind of collaboration, and we're having folks kind of cross-pollinate with each other. So we're inviting, so in terms of our meetings at Orange and Rockland, we have a monthly meeting, whereas Con Edison has quarterly meetings. So now I'm building it into our meeting schedule that our council members will be attending the VIA advisor meeting, so that there's some cross-pollination there. In some of our, we use Yammer as kind of a social networking group here. And so we make sure that our council members are tied into that and able to participate in conversations. The philosophy for us is that, not only is the council recognized here at Orange and Rockland, we're also a much smaller organization, and culturally, this is what works for us. But we recognize we are a tenth the size of Con Edison, and so but we also understand that the Con Edison program really works for the Con Edison structure. So I think it's important to kind of build your programs based on the cultures that they're going to be supporting.
Yeah, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach here, and I think that we're going to see that throughout today and throughout tomorrow, as all these different people that have been purveyors of these types of programs, they've had to make it work and make something work for their particular organization. So there's some good questions coming in the chat that I'd like to kind of start chewing on here. So SCE folks, I'd like you guys to start with this question, and then we'll circle over to Sean and Mike. But when we think about background checks for these people from a selection criteria basis, how deep are we diving? What do you think about background checks? Is it just looking in your case management system? Are you hiring a private investigator to park their car outside their house? How deep are we diving here?
Shanon, do you want me to go, or do you want to?
Yeah, go ahead. Totally.
Yeah. So anytime a name comes to us, let's say we have an ambassador who's vacating, or maybe someone wants to add an additional ambassador at a location, we do work with ethics and human resources to make sure that there is no substantiated allegation. That is basically the minimum level. If doesn't matter what kind of what the misconduct is, even it seems something so minor, but if it was a policy violation of any sort, that person is not considered for the role at all. So that is definitely where we go. And then we also get feedback from our HR business partner in terms of, are they aware of, just how the person interacts on a day-to-day basis with fellow peers. So we want to get their input as well before we ultimately confirm that this person is going to be the representative for their organization.
So that sounds like a mix of some sort of quantitative or, binary data, Shanon, and then also some qualitative data. How many sort of character how many character witnesses do you need for an individual, and do you back that up with additional conversations, or can you pretty quickly get a pretty good sense? I'm just trying to get a sense of how high of a bar is it, how tight of a filter? Yeah,
Nick, I think just to reinforce what Tony Lynn said, it's like we do the background as a basic, like, is this person, had no investigations, were they substantiated or not? And then we really build the ownership with the operating unit and the leadership, is that they know their people their best. And if we want to create ownership, we really allow them to select the individuals that are very influential to their peers, to their leadership, and really want to represent them. And so I think allowing that ownership really builds some credibility to the program and the individuals and the influence to the program.
How about you, Sean? What would you add? Thanks for that, Shannon.
Yeah, so our vetting process is virtually identical with the addition of we work with the individual's leader to make sure that they're bought into the process, right? They're giving up some of their employees' time to work on, we ask for 2 to 8 hours a month. Like, the leader is giving that time up for the work that they're responsible for. So make sure that the employee is in good standing with the leader and is on top of their work. Just a couple quick stories, or I'll try and make them quick, from our vetting process, things that we've uncovered and had to deal with. We had one situation where somebody had applied to be a part of our council, and their name came up a bunch of times in investigations. And we thought, that's kind of curious. Let's dig a little bit deeper. It turns out that it was pretty coincidental that this person had just been a witness in a lot of issues, never had any cases filed against them, nothing substantiated. We talked to corporate security, who leads our investigations. They actually remembered this individual and said, you know what, I think you'd be a great person for the council. So joined, was all good. We also had an issue where we do the same vetting process even for people who are already on the council, just to see if anything has come up since they joined. And I think this kind of gets at, could people be using their position towards their own gain?
Mm-hmm.
And we did find a case where a member had committed a misuse of company assets issue while they were a member, was substantiated. My first thought was, we're going to need to ask this person to step down from the council. We talked about it internally. We talked to the individual. They said they expressed remorse. They didn't have a history of doing these things. And actually, it was our chief of general counsel who offered this position of, they've been through the process. They've been through the investigation process. They have a unique position on this now. Let's let them stay a while longer. We'll monitor it a little more closely than maybe we had previously, but let's see. So I guess I offer those two stories just to say, I think it's really a case-by-case basis. If you have the bandwidth to treat it that way, you might find that your initial instinct isn't where you ultimately want to go. So just give yourself some time and latitude to make those decisions based on the specifics of each individual case.
That second story is so interesting. Because Mike talked about having to tell somebody to step down, and I don't know the details of that particular situation, but I think if we zoom out from this ethics ambassador program, we need to probably keep two big principles in mind. One is that we need to use common sense. So it's not just scanning your system to see this person's name in there. Well, are they implicated in the case? Are they just a witness, to your point? But then beyond that, let's be opportunistic, right? We have to be common sense, and we have to be opportunistic. It's not a one size fits all, but also if you can use this person as a story of redemption, or get them to own it and talk about how, they've seen the light or whatever, that can do a lot. Again, if it's a lot of it's messaging, a lot of it is persuasion, but that can do a lot to reinforce the, how significant this program actually can be. What would you guys add to that? Did any of that resonate with you, or are you surprised by anything that Sean said? Sean or Shannon, go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely, Nick. I think something that we want to keep in mind is, did this investigation happen 10, 15 years ago? Has the person really learned and evolved from their previous experience, and can they be the champion that we want in the company? since that happened. So, these are some of the things that we've discussed. Is there a cutoff point? Has the person really matured and be able to be set or be a role model? So those are some of the things we want to consider as well.
How about you, Mike?
Well, I think absolutely, I agree with that. When we are doing our kind of quantitative vetting of negative findings, anything in our case tracking system, we look to the 3 to 5 for those kind of. But when it comes to kind of the ongoing, as Sean said, that ongoing vetting, it's what was the matter that the person was involved in. Mm-hmm. I can share the matter that the person I had to speak to really was a reputational one. Here was one. There was a finding of retaliation against this person, and so certainly someone who is supposed to be, touting an anti-retaliation or zero retaliation policy among the company would just not be the right person for our reputation as an ethics ambassador program, right? And so, in terms of the Ethics Council, we actually. So we do, and included in the toolkit is a questionnaire that for applications for self-nomination, and in some of those questions, it's asking sharing your stories, et cetera, and people will when we are reviewing those as a council. First, my policy is to make sure that I anonymize the names of the applicants for that year, and then I review that with our current council members, and we go through, giving notes. What do you think of their application? But then the second round is now we've named them, and so then we start talking about reputation. Well, Nick applied, Tony Lynn applied. Oh, well, there was this issue because, again, these are boots on the ground. These are employees who know each other. We're such a small company that everyone kind of knows each other. And then we kind of have this really robust discussion of, is this the right person to represent the organization, the council? And so there are discussions about that. And then, if we have to take it further, then we talk with leadership about that as well. Is this the right person who's applied? So we do apply kind of these filters on numerous levels to make sure that they are going to represent us in the best light as possible.
That kind of triggered in my mind a question that I saw in the chat, and I'd love those of you, which of you on the panel have unions in the mix? I know a couple of you guys do, all of you guys do. Okay, so how do you distinguish collective bargaining issues from those covered in the council meetings? How do you not, how do you have that sort of proper separation, and where do you kind of draw the line? Because I mean, I guess I could argue anything, but you could argue that some of these collective bargaining things are ethics things. So why don't we start? Why don't we start with you, Shanon?
So what we did when we first kicked off the program is we worked closely with labor relations. So they're the experts on the collective bargaining agreements. They know the guidelines. They can actually work with the labor reps and to be able to establish that relationship and why we're taking up their time. So that is something that we did early on, and we have ongoing have that relationship when we have union employees be part of the program.
How about you, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm reading the question is, kind of in our meetings when we're talking about things, how do we differentiate those topics? And I'll try and see if I can articulate this. We talk about things at such a high level that it generally doesn't come up to where we get down into this only applies to bargaining unit employees. I think when we do hit those sort of points, we might set something in a parking lot or off to the side and say, we're going to refer this to our labor relations folks, right? And we're going to involve whoever raised the issue or who was passionate about the issue in the meeting. So I guess it's, again, kind of a case by case thing, but we don't necessarily, our ethics council is not a judicial branch, right? Where we're legislating issues or, making final decisions on anything. It's really about talking through potential impacts, how the larger company would feel about something, and then making recommendations to the group that might be making that final decision. So if we did encounter something like this, we would maybe make a recommendation for further discussion, or just say, hey, we heard this in our ethics council meeting. wanted you to be aware of it. So that's how we would handle it.
That's great. Anything to add to that, Mike?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay.
The meetings are really where those issues can certainly be surfaced, because if it is being surfaced and by the one ambassador, then it's on the minds of so many more people. And we certainly have a direct line to our labor relations director and those folks who could actually manage those situations. But we make it clear, much like Sean and Shannon said, this is not the forum for us to decide this, nor are we the right group to decide this, but we certainly have the resource who we can refer to.
Got it. Okay, let's get super tactical here. We have about 15 minutes left. If you have questions that haven't been answered, please redrop them in the chat. There's a lot of action in the chat, which I love. So Tony Lynn, I'd love to hear from you about what do you do to make sure the ambassadors are positively engaged with the E&C program and feel like it's theirs? How do you actualize them to really run forward with this thing and live it out in their corner of the company?
Yeah, so we actually meet with our ambassadors on a monthly basis, roughly between 90 minutes to 2 hours at a time. And the way that we structure our meetings is we focus on a value of the month. So let's say one of our company values is integrity. And so we'll come in and have our SECO will actually come in and speak to them, whether it be about retaliation or maybe talk about a specific case study in the news, so that they can really it'll resonate with them, these kind of topics. And when you bring in these guest speakers from across the company, they get that visibility with senior leadership, and they have the opportunity to ask questions of them. And at the same time, we also, as a program team, make sure that they have the tools and the resources that they need to do their outreach, amongst the whether it be those who work in the field with with our union folks, or in the corporate office. So we do provide a lot of great tools and resources. We do utilize technology for that. We have great MS Way newsletters, things like that. We have an MS Teams chat group, so folks are more than welcome to kind of share best practices with others. And this might be something that might work well within my organization. And so we definitely encourage that teaming up with co-ambassadors, so that they can really be more effective in their outreach.
That's great. How about you, Sean?
Yeah, so I would say, just real simply, we listen to what they want to do. And so they set not the agenda, but certainly the topic for probably 75% of our meetings. It's ideas that our council has specifically requested to hear more about or to talk about. I think, like so many things, the follow-up is really important. If they raise an issue, like we had a case where we set a meeting time that was too late in the day for our bargaining unit employees. Like, they just tend to end earlier in the day. We changed the time. Like, we found a different time, right? And so making sure that they understand that we are listening and we are responding to what their needs are seems to keep them really engaged.
Isn't it funny how something so small like that can send such a big message that they're kind of part of it and it's not just being imposed on them?
Yeah, no, I think about this, not from the business world, but like, just, I have kids, and
right.
If I ask their opinion on something, I need to be prepared to listen to what they say, right? Or they are going to tune out completely. And I think that's true at all ages, right? If you're going to ask the question, you better be prepared to act on it. So we definitely try and live that.
How about you, Mike? How do you get that true buy-in? And how is the path to that buy-in and ownership different on the different sides of the fence in your combined organization?
So, I think the ambassador program itself, certainly on the Con Edison side, being nominated as and selected as an ambassador is, there's some cachet to that. There's some real, I'm a VIA advisor. And so there's a lot of tools and materials that we make available on our business ethics and compliance website for them to use as collateral for meetings and things like that. And I think, certainly we push for their leaders to recognize them, to give them value, and to really prop them up and as these ethics ambassadors. On the council side, on the Orange Rockland side, again, that same kind of recognition that these are folks who are there for you. They're your peers. They're your coworkers. If you have any issues, you can bring it to them. And I think both programs, we try to do what we can to make sure that the ambassadors know the resources they have available to give to their to any employees coming to them. So I think keeping them engaged in and giving them the opportunity to speak to people that they may not normally. For example, our CEO comes to thank the ambassadors at least every year, for their service. We have senior leaders on the Con Edison side at each meeting, giving their stories from the trenches about when they had to face ethics issues and how they handled it. But then giving them the kudos for being part of the program as well. So I think we have lots of ways to kind of encourage them, to keep them going. Plus, I think it's really that recognition that's the most important for them.
So do you guys, were you gonna say something, Shanon?
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit more. So I think the key messages on how we empower them is very important. That when we communicate, when we set up the program and continually, they know their organization the best. They know what's going to resonate with their peers and their leadership. And good point. We do a great job of providing them collateral information, PowerPoints, newsletters, key messages, but we really tell them to say, even though we're providing this to you, make sure that you customize this in a way that's going to resonate with your peers. And so that really empowers them as even though we're giving them materials, it's really, they're the ones who craft the messages. And then also we tell them that everyone's different in how they like to communicate information. So obviously face-to-face being one of the very most important, most effective ways of sharing information. But some people like to stand up in front of a large audience during an all-hands meeting.
Right.
Some like to have a one-on-one conversation, especially in the field. What I've learned and what I've gained from the union employees and the individuals who work with union employees is that a one-on-one informal side conversation can go a long way. It doesn't have to be during a formal team or staff meeting or an all-hands meeting. It's the one-on-one conversations that go a long way.
Yeah, and I think, so that's a great point. Thanks for jumping in with that. At the end of the day, this is human behavior that we're affecting. And it's going to be relationships, and it's going to be the trust that's established. And while a PowerPoint presentation or a big town hall meeting is great, many times that one-on-one conversation where there's actually a heart exchange or there's actually a connection being made can really pay a lot more dividends than some really pretty slides where there's, the spelling's right and all that kind of stuff. So how do we get the buy-in from folks? So we've selected them. I want to dive in, if we have time, to some of the selection criteria and how you end up, really sourcing these people in some interesting ways. But is there a charter you have them sign? Is there an onboarding process? Do they dip their finger in blood and sign their name? Like, how do you get them to actually what do you do to kind of get them to sign up for something? What is kind of on that type of a sheet? And would you mind sharing that with ECI so they might be able to drop that in the toolkit? Those are 3 questions. Take any one of them. Let's start with you, Tony Lynn.
Yes. So after we've gone through the entire vetting process and the organization leader says, this is the person that, you can proceed with them, we will actually schedule an overview conference call with them just to go over what the program is all about, because ultimately this is a voluntary role, and answer any questions that they might have. And at the end of the call, is this something that you feel you want to, be a part of? And if they need a few days to think it over, they're more than welcome to do that. But most of the time, folks will say, yes, I'm on board. I want to become an ambassador. And with that, we actually work with our program director to send them an official welcome email to the ambassador with a CC to their manager, just so that everything is written and it's official. And then at the same time, we also have a performance goal that we would like them to include in their development plans. And so that's directly sent to their leader with a CC to the ambassador, so that that's it. It's all written down, and that way that sets that expectation up front that this is not something that you can just casually. This is an actual.
It's a real thing. Yeah, it's a real thing. Yeah, it makes it kind of official. How about you, Sean? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I thought you were done.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sean, how do you guys handle it?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that really simply. Same as Tony Lynn.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the same process.
Similar for you guys, Mike?
Yeah, on our internet page, we actually publish what the commitment is. You know, what you're expected to be doing. Certainly at those first meetings every year, we go over you know, the expectations, the role. It's a great refresher for those people who have been on who are legacy on the council, and then integrating the new folks into the processes. Plus, we spend time with just like Tony Lynn said, you know, we spend some time with them not only in the beginning, but you know, see how they're doing throughout the program as they're in the program. So just checking in is always good too.
Good.
I would say that what we also do is we partner and we have our program director send an email or communication to each of the ambassadors' direct supervisor. So it really sets expectations that, you know, this is a goal that only can contribute or help them with their performance review. It shouldn't inhibit them or be marked off for it.
And do you guys have term limits? How long do these folks stay in? How many terms are they able to have? How do you guys kind of think about that?
We have folks stay for 2 years. At points, our council's been around for 7 years, I think, and originally it was a 3-year term limit, and we've shortened it to 2, partly because we've had so much interest in the program. We wanted to create new space. We have a waiting list. Like our council is 100 people. We just can't scale it at this point any more than that. We would love to add more members, and we're always thinking about how to do that. But the term limits that we have are a way to kind of make sure that we're refreshing the council and getting those folks who want to participate, let them be able to do that.
So that leads to another question. How do you think about too many versus too few ambassadors to make your program successful? How do you think about that relative to the number of people that they're sort of responsible for? And the size of your organization or the jurisdiction that you're in? Why don't we start with you, Mike?
I think certainly the size of the organization, the number of departments within the organization, certainly you want to get as much representation. You want it to be representative, as Sean, I think, started out with. You want it to be representative of the company, right? So we do strive to get as much representation from each of the organizations as possible. And then in terms of maybe of the term limits, we actually, on the VIA side, it's 1 to 3 years, and 3 years being kind of the max. 1 being kind of that ongoing checking. Is that ambassador actually ambassadoring? Are they actually being effective? On the council side, on Orange and Rockland, we do have 3-year term limits as well. But then what we also offer for folks who just love it so much but want to stay engaged, we have what's called an emeritus status. So after your third year,
that's great.
Year ends, they can then the fourth
you're still in the fraternity. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. You act as council of council. And that 1 year, they can take a gap year, stay engaged as an emeritus, and just keep that going as long as they keep attending, 1 or 2 meeters a year.
Hopefully that gap year is not like a Rumspringa where they're really violating everything. You know what I'm saying?
Hey, well, you never know, but no, of course not. Hopefully not, at least.
Yeah. All right. So let's dive in. We're at the end here. We'll go quickly, but I really love to kind of get your big takeaways, your big pitfalls. What would you avoid from a selection process? What did you learn for folks who are really trying to launch this program? Why don't we start with you, Shanon?
I would say that when you're going through the selection process and building awareness around the program and advocating it, and I think sponsorship is by far the most important thing you can do. And so making sure that you're also partnering with each of the functional areas to be able to build that partnership with the program. So for example, HR employee relations, hotline investigations, each of the operating unit leads. It's really a partnership and a system that you're creating in the organization. So I think building those partnerships early on is really important.
How about you, Sean?
I would say just don't be afraid to try things. I hope everybody's seeing from the first session to this session, this is not like an out of the box thing that fits every organization. And so, set those guiding principles and then go try stuff, right? Talk to your organization. Don't be afraid to just try something. And if it doesn't work, you can change it.
Great. Yeah, there should be a lot of freedom in it. It can be organic and it should be organic, to your point. And just that process, that iterative process can get a lot of buy-in because everyone feels like they're kind of part of it. We're building this thing together.
Yep.
How about you, Mike?
Yeah.
I think it's important to keep in touch with your ambassadors to ensure that they're engaged and that they are engaging with their folks. You know, you certainly want, as many of us have said already, you want them to be actively building relationships or keeping those relationships, because that's why they were selected as ambassadors anyway, right? You want them to be that representative for the ethics program. And then one other thing that I've learned through the years is that you don't allow the meetings to become kind of like the gripe session, if you will, for people, because that may be sometimes there's that difference where we talked earlier about someone bringing up a union issue or bargaining issue. That's fine, but then if it turns into a gripe session where it's all you're talking about, then you're kind of losing kind of the idea behind what the ambassador program is. So those are things I kind of learned through the trenches.
Yeah, we want people to be open, but we also need to recognize that we're in a leadership position from an ethical perspective, and we need to be invigorating the people that we're going back out to evangelize, so to speak. Tony Lynn, bring us home. What's your biggest lesson?
Yeah, I echo what everyone has said, and I think a key thing to remember is they need to have the support not only of their immediate leader but their senior leaders, because some of the ambassadors who chose to leave before their term limit felt that they did not have that support up front, and so make sure that is strong at the very beginning.
Great. Well, round of applause for this amazing panel. Ones in the chat. We're gonna go for 110 ones. If you got some good takeaways, drop a 1 in there. There's some good ideas that really everyone brought to bear. So panelists, if you have some of these resources, whether they're nomination questionnaires or those charters, maybe you can send them to the ECI folks and you guys can drop those into the toolbox. No pressure. Okay, I think we have a 10-minute break now. Thank you everybody for your participation. Thank you all for joining us. And thank you panelists for all of your insights and time and dedication to making your workplaces better.